Classics Confidential on location at the University of Miami. With me today is Mihoko Suzuki, Director of the Center for the Humanities here at the University. Welcome, Mihoko.
Thank you, Anastasia.
You actually are interested in the revival or the resurgence of ancient women during the early modern period.
Yes.
So would you like to tell us a bit more about your work in this area?
Yes, so I wrote a book on Helen of Troy and classical epic and Renaissance epic, English Renaissance epic in Spenser and Shakespeare. And but that was male writers using Helen as a sort of way of defining their poetic, position or innovation through the figure of Helen. Through sort of reimagining Helen, and also her surrogates. I call them surrogates or sacrificial substitutes, like Cressida and Shakespeare's Troilus and Cressida, and so forth. And now I'm actually working on a book on Antigone in the early modern period, and what's interesting is how Antigone shows up in situations of civil war as an important literary figure through whom to discuss political issues. So one of the things that was surprising is that during the English Civil War, which is in the middle of the 17th century, a number of playwrights, male playwrights, use Antigone as a way to sort of weigh in on the issue of civil war. And my argument there is that they can use the cultural capital of Sophocles and Greek tragedy, and also the fact that Antigone is a female character. That there's a way in which they can distance themselves from what Antigone says, although they're writing what Antigone says, and so it's a very interesting sort of cluster of texts in the middle of the 17th century. And what's interesting too is Antigone is sort of a subtext for female writers in the early modern period. One of the examples I discuss is a late medieval or early modern Christine de Pizan, who talks about Antigone's sister-in-law, Argia, right?
Okay.
And because she's a widow, and so is Christine, so she can identify with, the grieving for the husband. But it's interesting that she actually combines the two figures. So in Statius, for example, Argia and Antigone are doubles. But what Christine de Pizan does is she doesn't mention Antigone, but she uses Argia, and she actually makes Argia much more militant, right? Even more militant than Antigone. And
wow, that'd be something.
Yeah, so she actually, so she grieves for her husband and everything, but she is using Boccaccio's On Famous Women, but Boccaccio keeps, Argia as a very faithful, chaste wife. But at the end of Christine's narrative, or account of Argia, she is actually leading her female companions in combat.
Why do you think female writers in particular are drawn to these ancient women? You've also done work on some more recent writers such as Margaret Atwood.
Well, so for the early modern women writers, I think there's the humanist exemplum. So one of the ways in which they try to sort of use the femme forte from classical antiquity as a sort of example for women involving themselves in politics, or even in the 17th century French civil wars, women were actually leading armies in combat, so they could use Penthesilea or whatever. So for the modern writers, I think it's very interesting. Atwood is sort of demystifying of Penelope, and she's not this sort of
paragon.
Right. So there's a satiric edge to the the Penelope story. For example, she makes Penelope, voice resentment against Helen, right? And that this is for, and that never happens in Homer, right? And she says, for Helen's sake, here is what I'm suffering. And Atwood also is very critical of the way the maids are treated, the way they are executed. And actually it's interesting because, my Helen book, I actually talk about that from a scholarly point of view, but she actually does it in this
creative,
sort of creative vein. So it's interesting that the scholarship and the revision by writers is sort of, in a parallel track in the 20th and 21st centuries. So I think that Penelope is a short piece, but it's very sort of trenchant, insightful. And she uses different genres like vaudeville. The maids are actually, sort of dancing in vaudeville. There's a comic edge, but I think it's very well done. Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for talking to us, and we look forward to your Antigone book.
Thank you very much.